Hi gang, and welcome to another episode of Mr. Ed Draws. And in this episode I'm going to be doing part one of a project for a wall art that involves a paint pour and then an application to the canvas after that's dried and set and done. So in the first part, it's the paint pour. I'm going to use a swipe technique instead of the dirty cup flip where you put a bunch of colors in a cup and then you put the canvas on top of the cup, you flip it over, you pull the cup up, and the paint runs around and mixes that way. If you've watched any of these, you've seen that. And I've done that in the past. But on this one, I wanted to use some mesh cloth that was used in some packaging. And since it's a material, it's kind of raw material, I set it aside, and I might have a use for it later on in a project. And it turns out that I did. So I just took that cloth and pinned it to the bottom, and then I poured the paint. It's already mixed with the conditioner, and I think there's a little bit of a white glue in there, and some silicone oil that I mixed around just a little bit, and I added some water so I could get all three colors about the same consistency so that they move across one another pretty well. The black, however, was a little thicker. For some reason it does that. I'm not sure if I just have used old paint, or the black may be one that I accidentally mixed in some tempera paint, so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know, but it just didn't want to move as much, and that's fine because it can stay put. The blue and the white can run over the black, and the black would serve as kind of a background. I didn't want it to be too dark. I made two of these. The first one, this one here, turned out a lot lighter, and then the second one, because I used that canvas to catch the paint that runs off of this one, the second one was a little bit more muddy, so it got a little bit darker, but it had some nice webbing in there. This wouldn't be the first project which I've dragged my beard through the paint, so I kind of have to hold it back there. As I get, sometimes I just dive in and I'm not thinking about the extremities. So I'm using a straw just to kind of push that around and get some texture and see what happens. Get the paint to go over itself instead of rolling underneath. There's different ways the paint can move across the canvas, and if you do these projects, you'll get a sense of that. So you can use various things to help it along and get it to move the way that you want to, but you're so constrained by all the other variables that sometimes no matter what you do, you just can't get it to evolve the way that you want to. But once you get familiar with it, you can definitely give yourself an edge and coax things and keep the pattern, retain the stuff that you want to retain, and get it to evolve in the way that you want it to evolve. It just takes practice. So I'm kind of getting that to the edge. My hopes for this one is for the paint to run off the edge and retain that pattern, so that it looks like, instead of it just being a coating to the surface of something, it looks like it's a chunk that's been cut from whatever it is. So do this and do that if you haven't. That helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate it, and I thank a lot of you for it. So I'm letting this kind of settle and move around, and I think I'm getting a torch. Yeah, that's what I was doing. I was grabbing a torch so I can pop some of these bubbles. And in this particular one, those little bubbles, they were formed when I mixed water with my paint. You can take care not to whip air into those, and a lot of artists do. I kind of like the bubbles. I like when they pop. I like how it disturbs the paint. So I was intentional with trying to get a little bit extra air enrobed and trained in the paint as it was poured. So I popped those and tried to get some cells to form, and there was a lot of webbing on this, and the cells that did form got stretched and kind of warped as I was moving the paint across and running it off. And you can see there the edges are pretty well covered with that same pattern, so it doesn't look like it's painted on. It looks like it's cut from, like stone. That's kind of a detail that a lot of people that do paint pours, they like to retain. They like to let it to run down the side and keep that pattern on the side if you can. And not all of mine turn out that way because I'm really miserly about the amount of paint I put on them, and I think that's ultimately causing me some problems. I need to be a bit more generous about the amount of paint that I put on. I don't know, I've just run into problems where if I put a lot of paint on, then the initial pattern, which I enjoy, ends up running off or has to run off because you're going to have 1/4 of an inch of paint on your canvas. It's going to crack. So keeping the pattern when you put a lot of paint on there, I guess you just have to cross your fingers and hope that at some point, once the paint runs off, you're still going to have interesting patterns come up. And I've seen that happen on the pours that I've watched on YouTube. When you make one of these, you want to retain some paint so that you can go back through and touch up areas where it may have pulled apart and shown the canvas through, or the edges didn't get covered very well, and just kind of dab that on and let it do what it does. So I captured some of the runoff on this other canvas here, and I'm just going to dump that paint on there and try to be a little bit thoughtful, get some interesting distribution there. Now I'm going to use that cloth, and instead of it being pinned to the canvas this time, I'm just going to hold it there, see what happens. I have nothing to lose with this. This is kind of an extra work here, just playing around and seeing, you know, I've got this canvas, I've got the paint, why not? And as almost always, it turns out that when I'm not trying, I get the best patterns to show up. And as soon as I saw that webbing and saw how cool it was, I was like, oh, that's going to be really awesome. So let's do more. You know, if a little bit's great, more is better. No. Restraint. I just need to exercise a little bit more restraint, I think, and a little bit more patience. I've talked about this in other videos, how I have a tendency to rush things. The world just moves way too slow compared to my brain, and I want it to happen now. So that's a big problem with me when it comes to trying to get these to show the results that I know it's there. I know I can get this to kind of build more, and I can already see the problems that are happening, why I lost that beautiful webbing at the beginning. When you're tilting it and you're moving it this way and that way, if the paint catches anywhere, it's going to warp those cells. So you can already see those cells are getting bent and kind of twisted, smashed, and pushed up against the other. They're not the nice circular kind of perfect looking cells. And now they've just been smashed totally and to ribbons. So then you just get that ribbon result at the end, which that happens about 99% of the time when you rush things. It gets smashed together and you lose the volume of those cells. So you can see there's hardly any cells. They've all just been pretty much wiped out. Letting it run off the side, try to catch that pattern along the edges. I didn't have a whole lot of paint for this one, so it's going to be a bit more challenging. And it wasn't distributed on the canvas evenly. There was more paint on one side than the other. So, you know, there's a lot of variables. If you keep track of them and just practice a lot, you're going to get better. So I let those dry overnight, and I didn't have to mess with them too much. I set them down pretty level, and they didn't run off any edges anywhere. So that was a good result there. Right now they're kind of flat. I'll coat them with a finish, and then I'll do part 2 of this project. So look for that ahead. Hit the bell to be notified when part 2 comes out. And as always, until next time, thanks for watching and take care.